I have been working as a ward nurse for over 10 years now. You see a lot in this job. People coming in scared, leaving with relief, some fighting to live, others slowly fading, but nothing has ever shaken me like what happened a few months ago in Ward 3. It started on a cold Thursday morning. My night shift was almost over, and I was doing my final rounds. I had just finished checking on a patient with a fever when I got a message on my work tablet. It was a standard system alert. A patient in room 308 was ready to be discharged. At first, I did not think much of it. Discharge orders come in all the time. But when I looked at the name on the screen, my heart dropped. David Miller. I stopped walking. I stared at the name for a long time. It did not make sense. David Miller had died the night before. I was there. I was the one who stayed by his side during his last moments. He had no family to sit with him, so I did. I had held his hand as his breathing slowed. I had whispered words to comfort him as his heart finally stopped. There was no mistake. David had passed away. I had written up the post-mortem notes myself. His body had been taken to the hospital morgue hours ago, so why was the system now telling me he was ready to be discharged? I felt cold all over. I opened his patient file again, just to be sure. There it was. Full vitals, heart rate normal, oxygen levels good, blood pressure stable. The chart showed everything was fine. Health status, ready for discharge. The note had been updated at 5:45 a.m. That was just minutes ago, and according to the system, it had been updated by me. My name was right there, my login ID, my digital signature, but I had not touched that file. At 5:45 a.m., I had been in the supply room, stocking new IV bags. That room has no Wi-Fi. It is basically a dead zone. There is no way I could have logged in from there. No way I could have updated anything. Still, the system insisted that I had. I showed the alert to the charge nurse. She raised an eyebrow and said we should go check the room. Maybe the file had not been closed properly the night before. Maybe someone forgot to finish the process. We walked down to room 308 together. The door was slightly open. The lights were off. I pushed the door gently and stepped inside. The room was empty. The bed was made neatly. The blanket was folded just the way housekeeping always leaves it. The IV pole had been pushed to the side. The monitor on the wall was on standby mode. Everything looked completely normal, but the room felt wrong. The air was ice cold, not the usual hospital cold. This was different. It felt like walking into a freezer, the kind of cold that reaches your bones, even though you are wearing a jacket. I walked over to the monitor and pressed the screen. It flickered on, and it still showed a patient under the name David Miller. His vitals were active, heart rate 72, blood pressure 118/78, temperature normal. It was like he was still in the bed, like he had never died. The charge nurse turned to me and asked if I had maybe saved the data by mistake during my last shift. I shook my head slowly. I knew I had not. I had been the one to close David's chart. I had seen his time of death logged. I had written his final report. None of this made sense. She told me to go home and get some rest. Maybe I was overworked. Maybe it was all a simple mix-up. I agreed, even though I did not feel tired. I just wanted to get away from that room. I went home, but I could not sleep. I kept checking the hospital system from my phone, looking for David Miller's file. It was still there, still active, as if he were alive. I returned the next night for another shift. I tried to avoid room 308, but I had to walk past it during my rounds. Around 2 a.m., I noticed the door was open just a little. I paused. My heart was pounding in my chest. I leaned closer. There was someone lying on the bed. I could see the shape, the outline of a person under the blanket. I stepped inside and turned on the light. The bed was empty. The pillow had an indent, like someone's head had just been resting there. The blanket was slightly folded back, like someone had just gotten up. I felt a wave of nausea. I turned and ran out of the room. I called security. We searched the entire floor, every room, every hallway. No one was found. All patients were accounted for. No signs of break-ins or movement. Later I checked the system again. David Miller's file was gone. Not marked inactive, not archived, completely deleted, like he had never existed. No one else could explain it. I asked at administration. Nobody knew how it happened. They said there was no sign of any error. But I remember his face, his voice, the way he whispered thank you before he died. And now sometimes when I walk past room 308, the air feels cold again. Sometimes I hear the monitor beeping when the room is supposed to be empty. And every now and then, a system alert pops up on my tablet. Discharge ready. David Miller, room 308, always signed in under my name. And every time it happens, I swear, I feel like someone is watching me, waiting, still waiting to leave. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. I always thought strange sounds in hospitals came from old pipes or machines acting up. At least that is what I told myself during my night shifts. But after what happened in room 207, I am not so sure anymore. I had just started my new job at the hospital. I was still learning the layout, still getting used to the routines. I worked a night shift, which was usually quiet. Most patients slept through the night, and the halls felt calm. But one thing stood out from the beginning. Every nurse I met warned me about room 207. They all said the same thing. If you hear crying, do not go in right away. Wait, and never go in alone. If the lights are off. At first I thought they were just trying to scare the new nurse. I even laughed it off, but their faces were serious. No one smiled when they spoke about that room. On my third night, I was walking past room 207 when I heard it, soft crying. It sounded like a woman, not loud, but steady, sad and slow. I stopped in my tracks. I looked at the patient board. Room 207 had been empty since I started. No one was assigned to that bed. Still, the crying continued. I leaned closer, listening through the door. I thought maybe someone had wandered in and was upset. Maybe a patient had gotten confused. I knocked gently. No answer, just the crying. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was dark. I could still hear it. The soft sound of someone crying, right near the bed. I flipped the light switch. The room was empty. The crying stopped the moment the lights came on. I checked the whole room, under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains. No one was there. I stood still for a moment, trying to calm my nerves. I wanted to believe it was just the wind, or maybe a sound from another room. I turned off the light and stepped out. As soon as the door closed, the crying started again. That night, I asked another nurse about it. Her name was Linda. She had worked there for years. She just nodded when I told her. She said it started after a patient died in that room many years ago. A woman who had no visitors, no family. She cried for days before she passed. Nurses said she seemed afraid to die. She kept saying, "I do not want to go yet. I do not want to be alone." After she died, the crying began. No one was ever found in the room, but people heard it again and again, always at night, always when the room was empty. I asked why the hospital did not shut the room down. Linda just shrugged and said patients came and went, but the crying never stopped. Most of them never noticed. Only the night nurses heard it. I thought it was creepy, but I told myself it could be explained. Maybe old recordings, maybe a neighbor's TV. I wanted to believe anything but the truth. But on my fifth night, something happened that I cannot forget. I was doing rounds alone. The halls were quiet, the way they usually are. Around 3 a.m., I walked past room 207 and stopped. The crying was louder this time, not just soft sobs. It was full, heavy crying, like someone was breaking down. I hesitated. Then I did something I should not have done. I opened the door without turning on the light. It was almost pitch black inside, but my eyes adjusted quickly. That is when I saw it. A shape, sitting in the chair next to the bed. I could not make out any features, just the outline of a person, shoulders hunched, head down. The sound was coming from there, crying, steady and low. I froze. I felt like my feet were stuck to the floor. Every hair on my body stood up. I finally moved and reached for the light switch. As soon as the light flicked on, the chair was empty. No shape, no sound, nothing. Just the chair facing the bed, and the room still as ever. I stood there, shaking. I do not even remember walking out. I just remember ending up at the nurse's station, my face pale and my hands cold. Linda saw me and said nothing. She just handed me a cup of tea. I could not finish my shift properly that night. I kept checking over my shoulder. I kept hearing crying in my head, even when there was none. After that night, I avoided room 207 whenever I could. I would pass it quickly. I would pretend not to hear anything. But sometimes I do, and I know it is not my imagination. Other nurses still hear the crying. Some say they see shadows in the room when no one is inside. Some say the chair always ends up turned toward the bed, no matter how many times you face it the other way. But none of us talk about it too much. We do our work. We stay busy. We tell ourselves we are just tired. But late at night, when the halls are quiet and room 207 starts crying again, we all know the truth. Someone never left. Someone is still sitting there, waiting, and they do not want to be alone. People say hospitals are places where life begins and ends, but I think they are mostly where stories get forgotten. I have been a ward nurse for almost 10 years now, and there are things I have seen that I do not talk about, not because I am afraid no one will believe me, but because I know someone else always has a story worse than mine. Still, there is one thing that has never left me, something that started as a joke among the staff and slowly became the one thing that kept me awake at night. It was the call bell from room 9. Everyone on our floor knew that room had been sealed years ago after an unexplained death, but no one liked to talk about it in detail. Management said the room was out of use due to structural repairs. Nurses said different. Some whispered that someone had died in that bed, alone, after pressing the call bell over and over again, with no response. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late. I never saw the official report, but the story floated around quietly, passed along like an old ghost story told in hushed tones during night shifts. At first, the call bell from room 9 was a rare glitch. Once every few months, it would flash on the central board, and whoever was on duty would chuckle and say, "She is back." We would reset the board and move on, but then it started happening more often. Once a week, then once every few nights, and always at exactly 3:33 a.m. Never a minute before or after. That was when people stopped laughing. One of our newer nurses, Carla, thought maybe it was a wiring issue. She reported it to maintenance, and they came in to check. I was there that morning when the guy from facilities opened the panel and looked confused. He said the wires for Room 9's call system had been cut years ago, not just unplugged, completely removed. Nothing was connected. There was no way for that bell to ring. Yet it did. That very night, again at 3:33 a.m., the light blinked on, and the soft chime echoed through the ward like a whisper. I started paying attention after that. I began writing it down, checking the logs, tracking the pattern. It was always the same. Same time, same bell, same room. And no one ever answered it. No one dared to go near Room 9 at night. During the day it looked like any other sealed room. Door locked, windows covered, but at night, when the lights dimmed and the halls grew quiet, there was a coldness that came from behind that door. One night, I stayed late to finish some charting. I was alone at the nurse station when the bell rang again. I looked at the time. 3:33 a.m. My heart dropped. I stared at the board, hoping it was a mistake. Then I heard it again. The soft, distant chime. I stood up and walked to the corridor where Room 9 sat at the end like a black hole. The air felt heavier with every step. I do not know what I was expecting to find. Maybe a prank. Maybe a patient had been moved in without us knowing. But when I reached the door, it was still locked, still sealed. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. Silence. But the light on the board was still blinking. I ran back to reset it and told myself to stop being stupid. Things got worse after that. One night, Carla collapsed during her shift. When she came to, she kept mumbling about a woman standing beside her bed, asking why she did not come sooner. She quit 2 days later. Another nurse reported seeing someone walk past the end of the hallway near Room 9. But when she followed, the corridor was empty. Even the security guard refused to patrol that side of the floor after dark. He said the cameras always glitched at 3:33 a.m., right when the bell rang. I did not want to believe it was something supernatural. I really did not. I needed it to be a technical error, a mistake in the system. But then I met the patient in Room 11, an elderly woman who was recovering from surgery. One night she grabbed my hand and asked me if the woman in the next room was all right. I told her Room 10 was empty. She said no, not that one, the other one, the one who cries every night and asks for help. I tried to brush it off, but her voice haunted me. I could not sleep, so I did something I never should have. I stayed behind again, waited until the bell rang at 3:33 a.m., and walked down the hallway with a flashlight and my ID badge. I wanted to see if the door would open. When I reached Room 9, the light was already flickering. My hand shook as I touched the doorknob, expecting it to be locked. It was not. It clicked open slowly. I froze. The room was dark, cold, and smelled like something old, something forgotten. My flashlight flickered once, and in that brief second, I saw something in the corner, not clearly, just a shape, small, sitting, watching. I ran. I never looked back. I did not say a word to anyone. The next morning, I went to security and asked to see the footage from 3:30 to 3:35. The screen showed a clean hallway. No one walking, no door opening, nothing. Except at exactly 3:33 a.m., the feed glitched, the light on the nurse station blinked, and the camera outside Room 9 turned off for 3 seconds. When it came back, the timestamp skipped ahead. There was no record of what happened in those 3 seconds. I knew then that something was inside that room, something not meant to be seen, not meant to be understood. We begged management to leave the room sealed. They agreed. But the bell still rings, every single night, always at 3:33 a.m. I have learned not to answer it. I tell the new nurses the same. Do not go near it. Do not listen to the cries, because whoever she is, whatever she wants, she is not looking for help. She is looking for company, and once you open that door, she never lets you leave. Sometimes, I think hospitals remember things, even when people try to forget them. The walls do not talk, but the silence carries stories, especially at night. I had just passed my 5th year as a ward nurse when it started. It was little things at first, nothing that seemed serious. Patients in different rooms would ask if someone could please remove the old woman from their room. At first, we laughed, thinking it was just confusion from medication or sleep. But then it happened again and again, always at night, always the same question, and always the same description. She was an older woman, hair thin and gray, standing in the corner, wearing a tattered hospital gown that looked like it had not been washed in weeks. Her skin was pale, eyes dark, and she never spoke. She just stared. One patient described her as looking hollow, like she was not really there. Another said they could hear her breathing, even though her chest did not move. I brushed it off, at first, like most of us did, but then it started happening too often to ignore. One night, a patient in room 6 rang the call bell at around 3 a.m., terrified and trembling. He begged me not to leave him alone, said the old woman was back. I asked what she did. He said she did not do anything, just stood there, watching. I checked the room, of course. No one was there. I could not shake the way he looked at the corner, as if he still saw her even though I could not. I tried to calm him down, telling him maybe it was a dream, but he looked me dead in the eye and said it was not the first time. He had seen her 3 nights in a row now, and he was not the only one. Over the next week, 2 other patients from different rooms told me the same thing. An old woman, corner of the room, same gown, same blank stare, same silence. All of them described her the same way, even though they had never met each other. It started to bother me. I began asking around, quietly. Some of the older nurses nodded, like they already knew. One of them, Maria, pulled me aside and told me to stop asking questions unless I wanted to carry that fear home with me. She said the stories go back years, maybe decades. Always the same figure, always watching. No one knew who she was or what she wanted. One nurse said she once saw her 2 years ago when she dozed off during a night shift. Said she woke up feeling cold and saw the old woman standing right across from her, watching her sleep. I wanted to believe they were just scaring the new girl, but deep down, I knew they were not lying. There was something in their eyes, a quiet fear, one that stayed even when they smiled. Then came the night I saw her myself. It was during a quiet shift. Most patients were asleep, lights dimmed. I was checking in on a post-op patient in room 12. He had been doing well, no signs of confusion or distress, but that night, he would not stop staring at the corner. I asked him what was wrong. He whispered, "She is still there." I turned around slowly, not really expecting to see anything. I did. Just for a second, a shadow in the shape of a woman, thin, old gown barely hanging from her shoulders. I blinked, and she was gone, but the cold stayed, and so did the fear. Telling myself it was stress, lack of sleep, maybe even suggestion. I had been hearing about her so much. Maybe my mind just created what I expected to see, but it felt too real, too heavy. After that night, I kept seeing her out of the corner of my eye, in reflections, at the end of hallways, always for a second. Never long enough to prove anything, but enough to know she was there. And then something changed. Patients who saw her started getting worse. One man went into shock after screaming that she had touched him. Another died suddenly, despite being stable. It was as if her presence drained them, as if watching was not all she did. Tired to digging into the hospital records, quietly, of course, looking for anything. I found a single incident report from over 30 years ago. A patient who wandered the halls at night, elderly, confused, died in her room after repeated reports that she was afraid someone was watching her. Her name was Alice. I could not find a photo, but the notes described her clothing as a tattered gown, pale skin, gray hair. I felt sick. I brought it up to one of the doctors, but he waved it off, said we should not give weight to stories. That fear spreads faster than disease in places like this. I wanted to agree, and then my patient in room 12 died, cause unknown. He had told me 2 nights before that she was coming closer now, that she had taken a step forward, then another, that she would be at his bedside soon. I did not listen, and now he was gone. I begged the supervisors to shut down that room for cleaning, for spiritual clearance, anything. They smiled politely and said hospitals do not make decisions based on ghost stories. I knew then that we were all on our own. Now I work day shifts only, tired. I cannot handle nights anymore, not after what I saw. To the fear is not just in the stories, it is in the silence that follows, in the patients who stare at corners, in the way the air turns cold without warning. I warn the new nurses gently, do not let your patients sleep alone. If they ask for company, if someone says they see a woman in the corner, believe them. Watch the corners, and if you ever see her move, leave the room. Do not talk to her, do not look back, because once you see her face clearly, once you know she is real, she starts to come more often. She feeds on attention, and silence, and fear. And she never leaves, she just watches, always watches, waiting for the one person who will finally listen to her. Tired, and when that person does, they do not wake up. I still do not know what she wants, but I know this. Every patient who sees her dies. Some sooner, some later, and sometimes, when the halls are quiet, I still hear the faint shuffle of feet behind me, and I pray she has not found someone new. Some patients seem to know when their time is near. They stop asking questions, they stop fighting, and they start talking about things that make the rest of us feel cold inside. I remember one man in particular, Mr. Dalton. He had been with us for 3 weeks. Quiet, polite, always said thank you, never complained, but toward the end, something changed in his eyes. He would stare at the foot of his bed, like he was waiting for someone. One night, while I was checking his vitals, he said, "Do you know who the man in the black coat is?" I shook my head and told him no visitors had come in that night. He gave me a small smile and said, "He comes every night, stands right there, never speaks, just watches." I asked him if he had been dreaming. He said, "I do not sleep when he is here." That answer stayed with me longer than I care to admit. The visitor logs were empty. No one had signed in for Mr. Dalton since the day he was admitted, and yet every night, he insisted that the man returned. At first, I thought maybe he was hallucinating. He was on some strong meds, after all, but he kept describing the man the same way, down to the long black coat that looked dusty and too heavy for a hospital room. No face, he said, or maybe just too dark to see it, just a shadow that stood at the foot of the bed and never blinked. The other nurses began to notice how shaken he would get around midnight. One nurse said she walked in on him, whispering to someone who was not there. When she asked who he was talking to, he just looked away and said, "He is closer tonight." We started checking on him more often, keeping a closer eye, but the man in the black coat never showed up when we were in the room, only when Mr. Dalton was alone, and always at night. On his last evening, Mr. Dalton asked for a priest, said he wanted to be ready. The priest came, said a few prayers, and Mr. Dalton seemed more at peace. But just before he passed, he said something that froze my blood. "Tell him I am not afraid anymore." That was it. Then he was gone. We were all quiet for a while, just staring at each other, none of us willing to admit how much that one sentence had shaken us. We filed the death report, cleaned the room, and prepared it for the next patient. A few days later, a middle-aged man named Arthur was assigned the same bed. He had no idea who Mr. Dalton was or what he had experienced. For the first couple of days, everything was normal. Arthur was talkative, even funny. But on the fourth night, I walked past his room and saw him sitting upright, staring at the foot of the bed. He did not say anything at first, just watched something I could not see. I asked if he was all right. He turned to me slowly and said, "Who is that man?" I froze. I asked what man. He said, "The one in the black coat." I asked how he looked, and Arthur described him exactly the same way Mr. Dalton had. Long black coat, no face, just a shadow that watched, never spoke, just stood there. I felt sick. I knew I had never told Arthur about Mr. Dalton. None of us had. There was no way he could know. That night, 3 of us stayed near the room, watching the monitors, checking the halls, trying to find any sign of a real person entering, but no one came. Still, Arthur insisted the man was there, every night at the same time. Midnight, watching, I started digging through old records, wondering if this had ever happened before, and to my horror, I found 2 more reports, one from 10 years ago, another from 16. Different patients, same room, same descriptions, a tall man, in a long black coat, standing at the foot of the bed in silence, always at night, always just before death. I began to wonder if we had made a mistake keeping the room open, if there was something attached to it, something we could not explain. We tried switching Arthur to a different room. He was calm the first night, but then he said the man came anyway. Said he followed him, that he stood at the foot of the new bed now. He said he could feel him getting closer, just like Mr. Dalton had. He begged us not to leave him alone, but we could not stay in the room all night. On the 8th night, Arthur died in his sleep. No medical reason, no signs of distress. He just never woke up. That was when I knew we were dealing with something real, something beyond medical science or logic, a presence that clung to the dying, that showed itself only to those close to death. Some called it a hallucination. Some thought it was just the mind trying to make sense of the end, but I knew better. I had seen the fear in Mr. Dalton's eyes. I had heard the quiet panic in Arthur's voice. This was not a dream. It was a warning, or maybe a sign, that when the man in the black coat shows up, your time is nearly done. We asked the hospital to close the room permanently. They said there was no evidence of any danger, that we should focus on facts, but the nurses know, the ones who stay for years, who work the night shifts. We share looks when someone is admitted into that room. We listen carefully when they mention shadows or visitors, and when one of them whispers about a man in a black coat, we prepare ourselves, because we know what is coming. We know that silence is not always empty, and that death does not always walk in with a crash. Sometimes it just stands at the foot of the bed and waits.